Welcome to the Mind is Psychic, where we talk music, addiction, comedy, culture. If you like this content, please leave feedback and subscribe. Let's get into it. On this episode, I want to talk about the 90s. I'm talking MTV, actual music videos. I'm talking ice cream trucks. I'm talking Nirvana. I'm talking Metallica. I'm talking Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm talking about BMX in it. I'm talking about blacktop football, getting all scraped up. Yeah, that's what we're getting into today. So yeah, I'm totally a 90s baby. I'm older than dirt. Yes, I said that. I'm older than dirt. Not really, but I remember the 90s as something awesome as a kid, as a child growing up in the 90s in Southern California. It was, looking back, really, really cool. The camaraderie you had with your friends. Now, most of your friends, I would say, were on your same block. I mean, that was the story with me. You would make friends with the kids on your block because at that time, you weren't necessarily traveling 50 miles to see friends. Usually these are the guys and gals you grow up with. I just remember probably the most pivotal year was 1996 for me. Yeah, No Doubt came out with that bomb ass Don't Speak song. So I remember being back. So from 94 to 95, end of 94 to mid 96, we lived in Chicago, south side of Chicago, and we were, my mom and dad were helping out my grandmother, which was my dad's mother. And I just remember, like, I remember the cold winters. I remember it wasn't the funnest time of my life, but when they told me we were moving back to SoCal, there was not a happier kid on the planet. So we moved back, and I'm talking, this was May, maybe June of 96. So parents buy a house, and that whole summer was just phenomenal for me. I mean, I met some great people, some great friends, and it was one of those cool things that you just, you either mesh with them or you don't. And the cool thing was we all meshed. Yeah, we played, we fucked with each other and stuff like that. But, you had the cool kids with you had the cool parents that had like the pool in the backyard. Then you had the cool friends that had the basketball court. You had the cool kids that had the super soakers and all of that stuff, water balloons, that whole time. So at that point, I was actually I loved bikes. I loved having BMX, doing that kind of thing. Now, I never went off like crazy jumps or anything because I was a wuss. And I have many scars all over my body from falling, learning to ride a bike. So that was an adventure all of itself way years before. But I just remember, then you go to school the following summer and in September, and you meet more people. Mind you, I moved back to the town I was born and raised in. So I already knew all the people. I mean, I met a lot of new friends, but also I still kept in touch with the ones that I had before we moved to Chicago. So I was super excited about that. There was always those sleepovers. It was always listening to music. It was always an event. And most of the time, like during the summer, my mom bought us a huge tent to sleep like 8 people. It was one of those huge ones. And we actually had a pool. We had an above ground pool at the time. So the pool was next. So we did like we set it right next. We placed it right next to the pool. And mind you, this is the middle of the summer, hot as hell, but it was so cool to have like the 8-man tent that you could set up all of these sleeping bags in, and not necessarily going to sleep, but just chilling. We would do that. I remember getting babysat, and we would always just, we were so close knit with our buddies and stuff that by that time they would come over. We'd play video games. That's another thing right there, is the video games. Road Rash on Sega Genesis. Yeah, I was a few years older, but man, was that an awesome game. Tetris, of course, was another one. That was Game Boys. But getting back to the whole tent thing, I just remember so much fun. How the 90's were just so simple. And yes, I was a kid, so I really didn't know exactly what was going on. I was not 10 at the time in 96. So yes, I'm showing my age, and it's not like I haven't said it almost in every episode. But, you look at it and you wonder, looking back compared to now, how much easier it was, at least as a kid, I think, back then, because you made your own fun. Like I said, you had your bikes, you did have video games, but especially during the summer, we were outside. We were doing something. There was, I guess they would call it screen time now. Back then it was, you need to get out and get exercise, be in the sun and do stuff like that. I did play video games, especially with my friends and everything, but we spent the majority of the summers and even after school, once we were in school, just playing outside. And the rule, I think, along with many people that grew up during that time, was once the streetlights were on, you were in the house. And it was just an untold deal. We just all knew as kids what that meant. Some would try to extend that a little bit. Most of the time that didn't work out too well. It was just one of those cool, just those pastimes, I guess you would say. Where we lived was right in front of my junior high school and my elementary school. We were literally 2 streets up. So we would always go out there on, the playground on weekends and stuff like that. We would fire kites. We'd play baseball on the diamond. We'd do all of that cool stuff. Now, thinking back about the whole screen time thing and everything like that, like I mentioned, we were going full force. We would do bike rides, stuff like that. And that was our life during the 90's pretty much. At least mine was hanging out with friends, going to school, riding bikes, listening to music, all of that good stuff. It was something so iconic about the 90's. I can't exactly explain it. You had to be a kid then to truly understand it. And this was way before being scared about things in life in general. That didn't happen until like 2000. So that was still another 4 years along. So, I mean, I really tried to just have fun. I also remember that having a computer. I remember one year, I think it was either 96 or 97 Christmas. Um, my uncle was into software. Like that was one of his companies. And he, along with all my other aunts and uncles, went in and bought me a whole computer setup. And this was like 96. This was it didn't even have, at that time, it didn't even have like a modem in it. So I would literally just use their version of Paint. Back Microsoft Paint was like awesome. And then you had like these video games on the computer. One of them was like a skiing game. The other was like this try to blow things out of the sky with this tank type deal. There were education video games on there. So, and the most probably what I used it for was the Paint. Microsoft Paint was just the ish. I remember seeing it the first time and I'm like, oh man, this is awesome. And now, I mean, look at us, you know, 30 years in the future. And that's like child's play. That's being like an infant type of thing. Like, I don't even know if they have Paint on Windows anymore. See how much I don't use Windows, but just the kind of cool stuff that was just around, and then what I loved is later, probably a couple of years later, right before the new millennium, McDonald's. That was another thing. I was a huge McDonald's Jack in the Box kid. And I remember McDonald's having on Sundays 20-cent hamburgers and 30-cent cheeseburgers. So my mom would give me a fiver or a $10 bill, and that would be my Sunday. Me and my buddies would get together. Either my mom would drive us to McDonald's or one of my friends' parents would drive us, and we would just have a good old time on that Sunday. That would be the day that we really just chilled. We probably like played football or played video games in the morning. And then for lunch, that's when we got the burgers. And from there, we just had fun. But those cheeseburgers, I remember they were just so bomb. And you're busy, especially during the summer. You're always doing something. I also remember being 8 or 9. This was a few years back, probably 93, 94. I was also in a baseball league. Technically, it was called Challenger Baseball. It was for, handicapped kids. And the whole thing about it was, if I remember correctly, nobody won, which I believe, or everybody got a participation trophy, which kind of just even back then annoyed me. I get the premise behind it. Everybody's trying their best, so, they should get something. But I think I even asked my mom one day or my dad, why, even though we lost, did they just give everybody trophies at the end of the season? And I think a lot of times we didn't even keep score too much. Now, granted, this was eons ago, so I could be wrong, but it was just so much fun just living in the 90s. And we haven't even gotten the music part. I mean, the music in general would just like, odds are, I would have to say the 90s and the music for me personally was awesome. Now, I didn't really get into rap until like 98, 99. I remember distinctly my friends and their cousins were a little bit older. And that was the first time I was introduced to like aftermarket stereos and subs. And I remember a buddy of mine, his cousin had this little Kia Rio, and he had like 415s in the back. This was still when, like, I mean, this was like, these were huge. This was like a huge deal. And hearing one of those, a hip hop song on those speakers, it was insane. And this was, mind you, this was when you could still, when you had Alpines and, cassettes, and if you were lucky at that time, you even had a CD player. If you were really cool, you had a CD player. I can't remember if it was a CD player or if it was a cassette player. Anyhow, but they even had so it was the aftermarket stereo, And then also they had the external EQ where you actually like switch the knobs to the, the frequencies that you wanted. Like it was no like touchscreen that we have now where there's like, you know, 8 bands on, your stereo that you like just touch with your finger and just move along. This was like you would actually have to like hold them and then, place them where you place it at the frequency you want to. So that was all new to me. I had no idea. It was amazing. But I distinctly remember we were rocking the All Eyes on Me album. And that was probably 96, 97 that I was listening to that. And I just, it was one of those albums that, I mean, they would take us, I mean, even for drives, they would even take us like to the movie sometimes. It was just awesome. But I remember them playing All Eyes on Me, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Also, when I really got into hip hop was when 2000 Chronic 2001 came out in 99. That was the song, that was the album, man. That's what got me like 100% hooked, was when you put that CD in and you got the lowriders making noise, and then you've got I think it's the TXH surround sound theme song. I'm not sure. I could be wrong, but it's something like that. But when I remember listening to it, I'm like, oh Lord. And then you got the next 16, 18 tracks. Now I could be off by a lot of tracks or not, but no, there were 22 if I'm not mistaken. The last one being The Message. But anyhow, more importantly, listening to that, I just remember I'm like, Lord, this is phenomenal. That was the first rap record I ever purchased. And instantly I was drawn in. And about that time was Eminem. So this was in the late 90s. So that's when I totally, totally got the hip hop fever and have been a hip hop fan ever since. But one of the main albums that I believe that holds true to me to this day from the 90s was Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood, Sex, Magic. It came out in 91. And I remember having my cassette tape, and I would just put that on. I would go through batteries on my Walkman like crazy, because I was always riding my bike and just having that album on. And then I got Nirvana. Then I got Metallica. And what was nuts is all of those albums were all from 91. So I don't know why that particular time really stands out to me. It's just the 90s were just something else. Like they kept you just something, it was just something special. And unless you lived it, and it just seemed like a simpler time. It seemed like there was no rush. Now, we weren't wealthy by any means. I mean, my family, we were damn near poor. My mom worked her ass off. My dad didn't, but my mom did. And she made sure I had the best life that she could give me, especially in childhood. I remember the cool games that there were. You could go outside and not have to really worry about danger. That wasn't the first thing on your mind. The first thing was on your mind was like, let's go to your buddy's house. Let's go have a good time. Having the friends make up so much of the memory it was awesome. And during that time, that whole decade, as I mentioned earlier, I was into bikes. At one point, I think I had like 10 bikes. Everything from like lowriders to mountain bikes to BMX to, all of that good stuff. One of the things I remember was when we moved into the new house in 96 in Moreno Valley. My dad, one of his best friends built lowrider bikes with his family. Well, he had a spare. He sold my dad a spare. It was I want to say it was a 66 Stingray, just the frame. And that was the time, like my dad, we built it up. We would spend our days, we built the bike up, and it was so much fun. And at that point, I'm like, I was so bored. Like, I'm like, oh, I have to do this seriously. Now looking back, I understand why he did what he did, and he wanted to, work on it together. And he was one of those guys that if you would touch his tools without asking, it was a whole nother level of just assholeisms. It was nuts. Like just going into his toolbox. Oh man, his love was the garage and his toolbox and his tools, even though they were craftsmen. No shade to them, but that was his deal. So anyways, we built the bike up, we painted it. And of course I wanted it done super fast. So I ended up just it was a beautiful candy apple red. And then literally like 3 months later, I went over with a black spray paint. Like, I mean, the candy apple red was like so beautiful. It had the sparkles in it. And this was when my dad it was like airbrushed, because he had a like airbrush tool or whatever it was. And it was just so neat. So why I'm talking about all this is having those great memories as a child really, I think, sets a foundation that when you grow older, you can cherish more. Everybody has their ups and downs. Not every single thing with my dad was horrible. There were certain times that, he did cool stuff. So I don't want to knock him for everything. And then I remember him doing he bought me, I wanted an RC. It was one of those that you would build. A friend of ours had one, and he had a gas powered one. And this thing would go like 60 miles an hour. When I heard you would hear it because it took that, special gas, the special fuel. And it was loud and it was quick. And I'm like, Dad, I want this. So both of them, mom, dad, bought me it. And they bought me an electric version RC car. And it was nowhere as fast. I mean, it probably went 25, 30 miles an hour. It was the beginner starter set, because those things, they can get expensive, yo. They can get really, really, like a base one is like $600 or $700. And I think the one with the fuel that my buddy had, it was outrageous. So of course that wasn't going to happen in my household. And of course I, fit a bitch because I didn't have what I wanted, because I was a child. Literally, I was a child, and that's what I wanted. So just thinking back about all that was just it's just different than now. And granted, I'm a grown adult and I've had experiences and all of that. Everything, I believe, leads up to where you were at a particular time in life. And I got to say, the 90s, good, bad, and ugly overall, were really, really cool. It was just something that you would just love. You wanted to feel, for the most part, I always felt loved 100%. That's one thing my mom instilled in me, was she absolutely loved me to her dying breath. And at that time, during all of those years, she did the best she could, given with what she had. But she did what she needed to do to get me shit, in the fact that she always wanted me to be happy and just have the best life. She always, she busted her butt working. And at the time, I didn't really understand why she was always at work, because things cost money. And when your husband decides that he doesn't want to work, just do whatever he wants to do. And there was only one income, product of my mom. Didn't see her a lot because she was working. But back to that whole time, the feeling of immense happiness, the feeling of joy, the feeling of just not needing to care. Like, we had our responsibilities as kids, do your homework, clean your room, do your chores. But after that, most of the time it was just a free for all. So, just think back when you were during your generation, what meant so much to you? Was it hanging out with your family, doing, family board games? Was it hanging out with your friends, playing video games? Was it hanging out with maybe your family, your cousins, and just, doing a pool party? It seemed like a simpler time with no technology like it is now. It's not that it didn't matter so much to us. If our Game Boy broke, it was the end of the world. If we couldn't get our game from our Nintendo to work, we would blow in it and we'd be red in the face until we got it to work, because that was, we wanted to play those games. Street Fighter was like, we needed to make sure that we got it running because we had some butt to kick, So Mortal Kombat, all of that good stuff. So just keep in mind, like, cherish those moments. Just remember the good times. Remember the bad times too, because all of it, the experiences, you grow into a person because of all those. You can't have the good without the bad. You can't have the bad without the good. And if you could get through the 90s, I don't think it was as tough as getting through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but we still weren't, we weren't as wimpy. We had things that we had to accomplish. And there was, like I mentioned, during summer, you were playing outside. You weren't necessarily forced. At least I wasn't forced, but you wanted to do that. So just keep in mind, this will all tie in to everything. Little situations that you thought you had when you were young, now when you reflect on them, you're like, oh, you can kind of see where the windy road took you. Like I said, enjoy it all, just enjoy it all. And it's okay. You can cry a little bit. You can laugh, hopefully more laughing than crying, but it was a good feeling living back then. Maybe not so much at particular days, but looking back, it was awesome. Computers were not what they are today. We didn't have cell phones. I remember actually the cell phones my mom bought us, I think it was 98. We had AirTouch. Now, anybody from the West Coast that's a little older knows about AirTouch. It was a cell phone company. I think maybe they turned into AT&T or something like that. Not totally sure. They got bought out, but when, you had the cell phones, and those were the Nokia. This was before the brick Nokia phones, but they were awesome. So just think about it. Get you thinking. Y'all have a good one. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe and leave a comment. You can hear me on all major platforms and socials under the Mind of Psychic podcast. See you next time.